Hello, tere, privet, hey, dzień dobry, sveiki. In whatever country you are in the Baltic Sea region and listening to the presentation that I'm going to give. My name is Sandis Dejus and I am the researcher in Riga Technical University. And in terms of best project, we were responsible for the assessment of the current situation in Baltic Sea regards the industrial wastewater discharge to the public sewers. And in terms of this presentation, I'm gonna tell you about the conclusions and findings that we got during this assessment and research. The aim of the assessment was to assess the situation in the Baltic Sea region regarding the industrial wastewater outflows to the public sewer systems. And to assess the situation, we did it in three various dimensions. We assessed the possible problematic sources of industrial wastewater that is discharged to the public sewer systems. We addressed the legislative aspects on industrial wastewater discharge to the public systems. We tried to analyze where it works and where it doesn't work. And also we addressed or find the technologies used for industrial wastewater pretreatment and the possible cooperation models between the industrial organizations, stakeholders, water utilities, and all involved parties. The scope of the study was the Baltic Sea region. In total, 8 countries was in the scope. And to address the aim of our study, we made the questionnaire that was distributed to all of the Baltic Sea region countries. When you see the dark blue arrows, it means that the easy version of the questionnaire was distributed with 7 questions regarding the legislative acts in those countries. In other cases, the light blue arrows means that we distributed the questionnaires not only for the legislative aspects, but also including the industrial organizations and sectors that might pollute the public sewer systems. And to get the answers on the questions included into the questionnaires, we assigned the responsible partners in each country. And in terms of Finland, Sweden, Germany, and Denmark, the responsible partner was John Norman Foundation and the city of Helsinki. In terms of Estonia, it was the Estonian Waterworks Association. In Latvia, that were we, the Riga Technical University. Lithuania and Poland was taken care of by REC Poland, and in Russia, the responsible partners were ECAT Kaliningrad. So all of the partners were involved in the collection of the information on the assessment of current situation. And to make it more reliable and useful, we were asked to make the local expert groups that are involved into the industrial wastewater treatment, pretreatment, discharge, into the legislation development in the countries or into the research to discuss the local issues and the local problems on the industrial wastewater discharge of the public sewer, and to find the most urgent sectors of industry that pollute the wastewater systems, and to find the bottlenecks into the legislation or in the practice of treatment and discharging of industrial wastewater, and to try to address them to make the system work much more efficient. And when those discussions were happened in all the countries, the results were sent to us, and we analyzed the results gained from all Baltic Sea region countries. To address the industrial sectors, we needed to divide the industrial organizations in certain level of classification, let's say, and we based our classification on the NACE coding system. that divides the industrial organizations based on the products or things that they make. And we were looking for the industrial sectors that have the potential to discharge highly polluted industrial wastewater. It means that, for example, in the sector of legislation or economics, the industrial wastewater won't appear. So it's more or less the typical wastewater. But in terms of some production, for example, the food production, the wastewater might be much more polluted, and it might affect the public sewer if it's discharged to the system. And in terms of this possible industrial sectors, we have selected that the food production is one of the most urgent sectors that might pollute the public sewer systems. And in terms of the food production sector, we even divided 9 subsectors for different kind of food production to assess the most important and most urgent sectors that might that should be in the scope of water utilities and of the environmental authorities. And also we found 21 additional sectors that might pollute the public sewer systems. Mostly they are connected to the manufacturing of various products like electrical components, vehicles, beverages, and so on. Maybe the mining and the water supply, sewage, waste management and remediation activities also can pollute the public sewer systems, and it has been also found that in some countries they actually do. So in total, 30 industrial sectors were in the scope of the research. What we have found that in all of our countries in our scope, where we did the studies on the industrial sectors, the meat production and milk processing or dairy product production sectors were mentioned as the most important and most possible pollutants to the public sewer systems. In all 6 countries, you see that they have been mentioned. Also, the production of beverages have been mentioned as one of the most important sectors in 4 countries. And in total, 9 sectors were mentioned in our research as a possible pollution sources of the public sewer systems in a case that untreated or highly polluted industrial wastewater is discharged to those systems. And in total, in the Baltic Sea region or in those 6 countries, there were more than 3,000 industrial organizations in those industrial sectors registered, meaning that at least 3,000 point sources can be found in the countries that might be the sources of pollution and should be in the scope of the water utilities and also the environmental authorities. It should be mentioned that in this scope, those more than 3,000 organizations includes also very small ones that have the wastewater amounts less than 5 or 10 cubic meters per day. So the actual impact on the treatment plants or on the public sewer might be negotiated, but still it might be the potential source of the problems. And to analyze the sectors more carefully, we did the interviews for those most urgent sectors. We did the interviews with the water utilities where the wastewater is discharged, and also with the industrial organizations that discharges the wastewater to the public sewer. And in total, we made 191 interviews in those 6 mentioned countries. And those interviews were regards 134 industrial organizations. And what we asked in total 19 questions for each interview regards the discharge amount of the industrial wastewater, the pretreatment, existence or not existence in the industrial organization, the quality of the industrial wastewater, the cooperation model between the industrial organization and the water utility, and also maybe some local or specific legislative acts or rules that must be taken into account in this certain cooperation between water utility and industrial organization. And what we have found during those studies regards the contracts between industrial organizations and water utilities on the discharge of industrial wastewater, that in quite a lot of cases, the wastewater is in the scope of the water utilities, the industrial wastewater, and the overall percentage of those companies in the sectors that have the contracts with the water utilities on this discharge is rather high, with some exclusions. For example, in Latvia, where the percent is lower than 50, but if we take into account only the big industrial organizations that has the wastewater flows that are significant ones and might be actually the sources of the problems, the percent rises up to 61. And then overall, if we take into account all possible industrial organizations registered in the problematic sectors that we have interviewed, 60%, almost 60% of them have the contracts with water utilities. And if we look at only the big companies, industrial organizations, then almost 70% of them have the contracts with the water utilities. But still, there is some contracts missing in each of the countries. So it might be studied more deeply why the contracts are missing. Regarding pretreatment, we have found that in the food sector, there are mostly pretreatment plants installed. However, we have found that in most of the countries, there are some exceptions where the pretreatment plants are not installed. But for example, in Finland, the situation is not so bad because we have found that the food industry have a very good cooperation with the water utilities and actually treats the wastewater together, meaning that it's treated in one treatment plant and water utilities are aware of those possible higher concentrations of some chemical compounds of the wastewater. But in some countries like Latvia and Lithuania, the big organizations doesn't have any wastewater pretreatment and discharges it to the public sewer, and the cooperation is not set in certain level as it is in Finland. And also in other industrial sectors, it was found that the big companies are missing the pretreatment plants in those mentioned countries, Latvia, Lithuania, and they should be into the scope of the water utilities, but are not. So it is a problem in this case. And the most popular applied technologies in the food sector is the dissolved air flotation and the fat removal. Sometimes there's also some equalization tanks installed, pH neutralization and biological treatment, but that's not so often practiced. However, in other sectors, the most popular are also the dissolved air flotation and some more specific technologies as electrical coagulation or chemical treatment for some specific chemical compound treatment at those industries that are case specific for the organization. Regarding the quality, we have found that in most of the countries, the typical 7 parameters are set in the contracts. In the food sector, there are only some exceptions in Lithuania and Poland, where some external parameters besides COD, BOD, suspended solids, pH, grease, and nitrogen and phosphorus are taken into account. Those are case-specific parameters for industrial organizations that might appear in those. So the biggest risks are in the scope of the water utilities. Regarding the other sectors, there is much higher possibility to find some hazardous substances or primary substances or some much more complex chemical pollution. The situation is rather good because in most of the cases, the typical 7 parameters are analyzed and set in the contracts, and the external case-specific lists in each contract is set in most of the cases, except in Latvia. We haven't found any contract where additional parameters are set for those industrial organizations that might have some very specific wastewater discharge to the public sewer. So This is one quite urgent situation that we have found so far. And in total, it was found that there are 33 additional parameters listed in the contracts, different ones, and only 6 from 42 priority substances are mentioned in the contract. So meaning that quite a lot of substances are still not in the scope, but maybe they should not be in the scope because they cannot appear in the industrial organizations. And in most of the cases, the responsible organizations for the discharges to the sea are water utilities, so they are in the finding scope if something goes wrong. And regards legislation, it was found that the legislation is in force already for 30 years. It has been adapted from beginning of the year 2000, and the last countries that have adopted the legislation was 2017. The legislation is very country specific. That is not so bad, but in case if it's municipality specific, it might be worse because it might be much more affected by politicians and local idea on the industrial wastewater treatment. Basically, in all of the cases, the water utility needs to have the contract with the industrial organization, and in terms of the contract, the quality, the discharge amount, and the possible finding and additional tariff system is mentioned. So it should be quite clear in all of the cases. Also, there is some exceptions found. And the conclusion that we have found in this research was that there is limited knowledge on the industrial wastewater impact on the municipal treatment plant in both sides of the pipe, in sides of the industry and also the water utility. The water utilities are not aware that they can use actually the industrial wastewater as a possibility to treat more efficient its wastewater at the municipal treatment plant. And there are quite a lot of cases that they are not aware how to set the limitations. They set only the default limitations for the various compounds. It has been found that there's limited knowledge on the priority substances and the possible impacts on the treatment plants and the water bodies in all of the sites that we have interviewed and that are in the scope. The sludge mostly is considered as the waste, especially in industrial organizations, the sludge mostly is taken to the biogas production plants, and they doesn't care actually what happens with that afterwards. And nutrient recovery was found only in 1 from 134 industrial organizations we have interviewed, and the situation is very country and municipality specific. The challenges that we are facing or will be facing in the years in front of us is that the legislation in theory is in place. However, the politicians often doesn't have the will to implement it in all of the countries, and they in one or another way impact the local or the national authorities how to interpret the legislation. In most of the cases, the only responsible for discharge to the water bodies is the water utilities, what is not the best practice, and it should be changed. The environmental authorities should be strengthened in all of the countries, especially in the Baltic states. The integrated permitting system should be analyzed and changed in Baltic states, especially that in terms of the permitting, also the water utility should be involved, and not only the environmental authorities. The legislation on integrated permits in their waste of discharge in Finland, Sweden, Denmark, and Germany ensures that the water quality have a partner. We should also discuss this in Baltic countries, that we are partners, not two different sides and enemies. In Finland, water utilities and industrial organizations have regular meetings on industrial waste discharge, and the priority and hazardous substances are partly listed in the permits and contracts, mostly in Finland, Germany, and Sweden. And actually, the appearance or possibility of appearance is evaluated. In case of Baltic countries, it is not so clear, but it might be taken into the account. Introduction of a new regulations and finding systems in Latvia showed that the fines works quite well, and a lot of pre-treatment plants have been installed. After our interviews, a couple of industrial organizations reorganized their production lines and are making actually new products. For example, they are collecting blood and making some products from that. And the public and private cooperation on industrial municipal wastewater treatment or pre-treatment works quite good in Finland, Sweden, and Germany. However, in the eastern side of the Baltic Sea, it doesn't work so efficiently. And I hope that this has been one step closer to the green Baltic Sea, meaning that we will not see the sea green because of the algae, but because we have treated the wastewater properly and it is green and clean. And if you want to find some additional information, there's the link where to find it. And thank you to the BEST project for financing our research. And I hope that we have done something, that we have approached cleaner and safer Baltic Sea. And thank you for all partners involved in the project. And I hope to see you again in next projects in the future. Thank you. Bye.